Hello there, and welcome to a DF Direct mini special. We're bringing you this one in the wake of Unreal Fest 2025, kicking off with a keynote presentation showing a remarkable Unreal Engine 5.6 demonstration using assets from the forthcoming game, The Witcher 4. Joining me to discuss it, our resident Unreal Engine 5 expert, Alex Battaglia.
Yes. I've been dunking on Unreal for so long that it's nice to actually talk about something positive for once, right?
Well, to be fair, I mean, it is a pretty astonishing engine, but
it is.
Obviously there have been flaws. And this demonstration, remarkable in many ways because, well, we'll get onto it later, I guess, but it's addressing some of those flaws that we've discussed in the past. Seemingly, it's exciting stuff. So I guess before we kick off on this, full disclosure, we're actually going to be attending a presentation at CD Projekt Red to get more details on this. So necessarily, we're going to be keeping our speculation to a minimum on this, simply because why should we speculate when we're going to find out from the horse's mouth exactly what's going on with this thing? But it certainly looks impressive. Alex, first impressions.
I guess the first impressions was, wow, this is running on a base PS5, which was not necessarily my expectations of what this demo would have been. Initially, when we got wind about it beforehand, I was initially thinking it would be another PC demo because CD Projekt Red tends to demo all of their stuff on PC before release for all their games and keeps the consoles almost hidden to the very last second. But I think this implies a little bit that they, unlike titles of the past, where they've struggled at the end right before release to bring those console versions to a good level of quality, that they're now focusing on it right from the get-go. And that was shown out all throughout the demo, which was, running at 60 FPS.
Mm-hmm. Impressive stuff. I guess the question we need to address first of all, and it's the question that was asked of me pretty much directly after the presentation finished, the plausibility factor. Is this actually running on a base PlayStation 5 or not? Right.
I'm just going to say yes right from the get-go right there. And there's a lot of contributing reasons to believe CD Projekt Red, as well as Epic and Unreal Engine. Well, for one, Epic is putting their reputation on the line by doing this as the center piece showcase at Unreal Fest. If they were lying, that'd be a pretty big thing, both for their investors as well as the very serious contracts from the people who are buying the engine to use it and using it, paying money. But regarding the presentation of it itself, there's a lot of aspects of it where you can see flaws that you wouldn't imagine they would put in there for the purpose of showing a PC version of the game. We had access, everyone was watching this either on the stream or after the fact on YouTube. And a lot of the re-uploads were of a 30 FPS stream, which wasn't very nice, to be honest with you. It would have been nice if that was also 60. But the 60 FPS asset we got after the fact was very, very large. I mean, it is quite a long video. It's like 17 minutes in total, I believe, from beginning to end. But it was like almost 23 gigabytes and above 200 mbit. So it is very high quality footage. It's higher quality footage than, for example, my archive footage at its best is usually,
yes.
Which says a lot. And I'm storing stuff, long term at high quality for the purpose of comparisons. So it was very high quality. And that allows us to examine the IQ more. I think it was kind of obvious already over even the 4K 30 streams that we weren't looking at a particularly precise looking presentation. It didn't look 4K, I would say. And then when you had the asset right in front of us in high quality, it kind of looks like what you'd see from a game that was targeting 1440p using upscaling, which, given the feature set that they're showing off here, makes a lot of sense. That would fall right in line with a lot of other current generation games that we've seen, like Alan Wake 2 or Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, or any of those games that have a 1440p 60 mode. And those tend to use upscaling.
Yeah.
It looked a lot like that, basically. Still, I would advise a little bit of caution about what we're seeing right here, just because they specifically call out the fact that it isn't Witcher 4 the game, but it's Witcher 4 the tech demo. So we're seeing things that won't end up in the final game probably. We're also seeing probably a different level of polish because The Witcher 4 is going to be a large open world game. And it's going to have much more varying scenarios and varying levels of artist inspection for a very large open world.
Yeah.
And so you'd imagine that there'd be more variability of load potentially. There could also be less areas of polish. And specifically regarding the frame rate, just for the sake of it, I could tell by eye, but just for the sake of it, I ran it through our tools. It's flawless throughout. And there's one aspect of the demo that I may not end up being in the shipping version of The Witcher 4, and that is that camera cuts are actually played out flawlessly. A lot of Unreal Engine games, even really well-polished ones, will still drop a frame on camera cut because dynamic resolution can't tell you what's happening a frame ahead of time, and it sometimes is a bit too high res on a camera cut, and it has to drop because the frame goes over budget there, and you'll see like 33 to 50 millisecond frames in between camera cuts. And that's really typical to find in an Unreal Engine game, and even almost any game, actually. And sometimes devs do it on purpose, like in Doom the Dark Ages, they hold on camera cuts, even on super high NPCs that are running at like 200 FPS, because they want their RTGI to propagate and denoise, so you don't get super raw cuts on camera. And here they actually play out flawlessly at 16.6 ms, which is beggars a little bit belief there. I'm curious how that happened. But as a result of that, you can see when the camera moves really quickly, or when there's camera cuts, you can see flaws in image quality. For example, lighting takes a bit, like when the coin flips, they show the coin on the ground and the lighting switches within the span of one frame to a different time of day, and Siri picks up that medallion or coin. You can see that the lighting there actually takes a while to propagate after the camera, after the time of day switches. Also, after camera cuts, you can see a lot of materials and textures loading in over, like 5 to 10 frames, depending upon the scene. Same thing when the camera moves really quickly, you'll see stuff like that. There's also like low levels of anisotropic filtering throughout all the demo. There's a lot of stuff that says to me, based upon like the image quality and image quality flaws, yeah, this is definitely running in real time, and they're demoing it on something that isn't top-end kit. And if they say it's a PS5, I definitely am going to believe them there. So unlike what a lot of people maybe were a bit more skeptical online, I think my eye could see through it, and it looked very realistic.
Yeah. From my perspective, a couple of things. First of all, it's fine to point out these flaws simply because it kind of validates that this is the real deal, right? Which is something that people are bringing into doubt, which I think we're pretty happy that this is indeed running on a base PlayStation 5. And just the sort of general blurriness of it, the concept of running it at 60 frames per second means that necessarily there's going to need to be some kind of mitigation in place to make that happen. And running at a lower resolution, upscaling to 1440p kind of makes sense, right? So I think, it doesn't really detract from the scale of the achievement of what you're seeing, some of which we're going to quickly talk about now. But, for those that are sort of doubting, we really do think that take them at their word. This does seem to be running on a base PlayStation 5 there. Of course, how it's all going to measure up to the final game remains to be seen. That's years off, right? Which I guess is why we've got that disclaimer in place that this is a demo, not the actual game. But let's talk key systems, because there's been some claims made which I think we need to discuss. Let's talk about ray tracing. Ray tracing at 60 frames per second, no less, which we would take to mean hardware Lumen, right? Which for a console at 60 frames per second is extraordinary, I'd say.
Yeah, especially given the density of the world. In a game like Fortnite, you can see how the most recent season did allow that to occur even on base PlayStation 5, which they did update, by the way, to add in hardware RT to the base PS5 there in the latest season of Fortnite. Because, if you look across that world, it's pretty scarce, and it's, written around the ability to even run on stuff like Nintendo Switch or a phone, right? The density of the world is very different in comparison to a game like this, which is a lot higher. And on the blog, going in deeper into detail about Unreal Engine 5.6 features, they do talk about how hardware Lumen has now been updated to be a lighter load on the CPU, regardless of how heavy it is on a GPU, which hardware Lumen typically has been in the past, at least at the high preset within the engine, a bit heavier than software Lumen on the GPU, but just because it's achieving much higher detail. The CPU burden was always much higher. I think I've measured in the past when I did like a 5.4 video, like 30% or even higher, one just running through a scene, while CPU limited on a PC. And it was a pretty big deal, obviously, because in a game, in an engine like this, especially an open world one, CPU is probably your main limiting factor. And that is the key kind of like breakaway technology from this demo, I would say. We've seen hardware ray tracing on the base consoles for UE5 extremely rarely. In fact, so rarely, other than the Matrix demo and the most recent season of Fortnite, I'm really struggling to see and think of any UE5 games that have really used it. And even then, the original target for hardware RT on consoles for Unreal Engine 5 was always 30 FPS. That original Matrix demo was targeting 30 FPS, and hardware RT was one of the reasons why. And here, seeing it running through an area with a bunch of vegetation, which is a typical pain point for RT, a lot of moving characters, for example. These are all pretty impressive things to see while running the hardware RT profile. Still, as I say that, the demo didn't give great clues as to how high fidelity this hardware RT is running on the PlayStation 5 here. And that isn't the slight or something like that when I say that. It's more like the demo has the camera moving really quickly with a lot of motion blur, and there's no great, it takes place in the world of The Witcher, which is medieval, more or less. And so there's not a lot of glass and polished metals and things like that, where you can get a greater sense of the areas where RT needs to be skimped on for performance purposes. So I couldn't see, for example, if all the skin characters that they mentioned at one point are included in the ray tracing structure. I would imagine that for performance purposes, they probably wouldn't be to some extent or reduced in some way. I couldn't see like the way vegetation is handled in it. Couldn't see a lot of things, but there were still some screen space artifacts that were visible on the few bodies of water that were there, as well as some general lumen instability that could be seen in a couple scenes when the camera wasn't blazing through the landscape, where it was pretty hard to appreciate anything at that point. But I would say this is really impressive, and I'm stoked to see what it shakes out like in a final game with more variability, as well as presumably larger bodies of water, which is typically the pain point for Lumen RT.
Okay. You were talking about vegetation there, and we saw another key technology being unveiled there, which is specifically Nanite, the sort of micro-geometry system that's in Unreal Engine 5. Now, famously, when we first looked at those original Unreal Engine 5 demos, there's a lot of stones and rocks going on. Then we went to the Matrix City, not a lot of foliage, trees there. And it wasn't really a system that was compatible with Nanite, the right. concept of vegetation. But they made a special focus of it here. They also showed us how they did it. And this is good news, right?
Yeah, so this is cool because they did technically preview vegetation. It might have been 5.3 or 5.4 using Nanite, but the authoring of those as well as the fallback system for it was different, where in games for a really long time, and I mean a really long time, the way you would do small, highly detailed vegetation or just even large vegetation would be you'd have a big two triangles slapped together to form a quad. So it's a rectangle or a square. And you would have a texture that has an alpha value of 0 or 1. So transparency would be like your 0, and your 1 would be the place where it's full bright, or not full bright, but you can see the full value of the RGB there. And that's how you would have essentially a couple of leaves or a grouping of leaves or the needles on a pine tree. That's how you'd represent them, with these transparent quads of geometry. And the actual leaf detail would just be 2D. It wouldn't face the camera necessarily, but it would be as a 2D element in the game world. And there's a lot of reasons why that's problematic. One, when rendering those things is expensive. Transparency is pretty much always expensive. So you'd get like overdraw issues and whatnot when you get really close to trees, and a lot of them would be overlapping. How do you call out that information? Also, how do you level of detail that information, which is essentially just a texture attached to a piece of geometry? Usually geometry, you decimate it at a distance, right? But it's already the simplest form it can be, right? It's like two triangles slapped together with a texture on it. So how do you level of detail that? And usually that causes in games level of detail transitions on things like trees and bushes and grass to be quite obvious. So it's performance intensive. The level of detail behavior is intense, as well as then just doing the rendering and lighting on it, like ray tracing. They've come up with kind of mitigation strategies in ray tracing. We saw recently in Assassin's Creed Shadows, they would, in the ray tracing structure, they would purposefully reduce the amount of triangles and trees instead of having to trace against these quads with textures on them, which are transparency, and they would invoke an any hit shader, which is expensive. They would reduce them into like kind of not super representative, just triangles that would look like leaves. And that's like a mitigation strategy that is kind of not a great point to be at for performance as well as visuals, depending upon what you're looking at. So there's a lot of problems with the way traditionally vegetation has been done. We've seen NVIDIA try to get around it with OMMs, opacity micromaps, where they avoid the problem altogether by representing it as a different type of geometry. But that's, once again, is just another midway point to actually solving the issue, which is instead of rendering these things as alpha cutout cards, you'd actually render them with real geometry, which is kind of what we want at the end of the day for fidelity purposes. And Epic's take on it here is pretty interesting. They leave the leaves of the tree, and not necessarily all the branches, but maybe like the more twig elements on it, as like highly instanced like rotations of the exact same object, just placed all over the tree. And as the camera gets further away, that decimates in the normal way using nanite geometry that we've seen in many games in the past. But then as the camera pulls back even further away, when it gets like sub-pixel size of that element of whatever we're looking at, it transitions into a voxel representation of it. So it's volumetric. And based upon what I can see in the trailer, they show it like really quickly transitioning on one tree while the camera's close. That's not how it would be in game. They're doing that for illustrative purposes. You can see what looks like 8 level of detail transitions for how coarse these voxels are. And that's really cool because at a certain distance, you don't see individual triangles anymore. You just see like a color value. But it needs to still be volumetric because things like shadows have to apply to it, lighting has to apply to it. And here they thought voxels were a good fit, and it does look like it in the demo. It was pretty hard to see many level of detail transitions at all, even at a distance. And they show off very, very nicely how it also plugs into the lighting and shadowing system. So you can see direct shadows being cast from the sun on it, as well as presumably other lighting effects can apply to it. But still, I have a lot of questions about this. Voxels don't play into triangle RT, which the demo was showing off. It was showing off hardware ray tracing. So they need to talk about or describe, or maybe they don't even have a solution yet because this is just a preview of 5.6, of how indirect lighting can bounce off, or you can actually bounce rays off of this thing that isn't just screen space. And there's good reasons to have that, because you can imagine a game like Avatar Frontiers of Pandora. Above you, there's like a huge canopy that's like 50, 75 meters away. If rays didn't bounce off that canopy in some capacity, you'd have like really bright lighting really far above you. And it wouldn't make sense because it's a canopy. So there's some things that they haven't talked about here that I'm very curious about how they solve it and if it's solved. But for the purpose of the demo, this is really big because we're seeing a great way to level of detail vegetation at a distance and keep it performant. And I think that was obvious by the fact that we're seeing it at 60 FPS and also not showcasing this level of detail behavior at the same time on a base PS5, which is the most impressive part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's move on. The other thing that was really cool about it was, well, I'm just going to quote your notes, 300 skinned animated characters. So they really did a pretty good job here of displaying not just an open world, but a populated open world. You know, that village scene that they were doing there was really, really impressive. How much is this CD Projekt Red? How much is this UE5?
Well, I would imagine it's a collaboration between the two that allowed such a thing to occur, because the metahuman characters we saw in the Unreal Engine 5 Matrix demo, they probably do not have the same level of fine-grain animation and like fine-grain, you know, like chores that they have to do during a day. If you've ever played the Witcher games, you can go to Novigrad at night and you can go during the day. It's a very different experience. Everyone's out and about versus everyone then goes inside and disappears for the day. So there's stuff in there that is from CD Projekt Red because their game has different, you know, functions that it needs to do. But in terms of like the way the rendering is done, I'd imagine a lot of that also does come from a deep collaboration with Epic. And that is the expensive part, that where in a lot of games, as you start having characters pile up in a scene, it tends to run really poorly. You can kind of see this in Novigrad in The Witcher 3's next gen version, where if you go to the center of Novigrad on like a Ryzen 5 3600 or a PS5, you'll start seeing frame rate dips and stuff like that. It's just all the characters. It's expensive. And especially in the context of using hardware ray tracing, depending upon what they're doing here, it gets even more expensive. So here they specifically talk about lighting the CPU burden of all these characters. I'm not sure how, I think I need more detail there. Well, that's what I hopefully find out when I go to Warsaw in just about a little under a week's time now, to talk with CDPR, because there's a lot of ways you can reduce the overhead of a character, and it's GPU processing, CPU processing, and I guess we'll find that out soon enough. But it's still pretty cool to see, because we'll see larger cities then, hopefully, in the next Witcher title.
Another thing we've got to talk about quickly is open world and streaming specifically, because that's kind of like the key challenge with any sort of open world game, is that obviously with such a large world to deal with, you're constantly shuttling data in and out of, from storage to memory, etc., etc. And historically, Unreal Engine has had some issues here with the infamous traversal stuttering problems that we've seen. No traversal stutters in this one, though. So any explanations or clues as to why?
They do directly call it out in the demo. They describe it as a new streaming system. But if you go to the Unreal 5.6 blog, as well as just scroll back in time to a presentation at an Unreal Fest not too long ago, from a gentleman whose name escapes me at this very moment, who works at CD Projekt Red. Excuse me. It's a little early. They came up with a new lightweight streaming system that essentially the issue in Unreal Engine 5 was never, we have to get data off of disk into memory. That wasn't it. It was actually super efficient at that, as we've seen in the past when we would measure stuff like, it required only like a SATA SSD. It wasn't actually an issue, that aspect. But the issue was initializing the actors. And a lot of things could be actors in Unreal Engine, just based upon the way an artist would have set up the scene. They place a mug somewhere, and it's using the base actor system. And it has a lot of extra stuff attached to it that it doesn't need if it's just a static mug, right? And they needed a new way to stream in such simple geometry that doesn't require extra doodads on it, like stuff that it won't end up using. And they came up with a light streaming actor system. And there's a plugin now for Unreal Engine 5 based upon certain aspects of that CD Projekt Red made and developed. And it's a generic plugin that you can elect to use for a game. And they seem to be using it here. The big issue was like the game thread update in that moment, and hopefully allow it so that it is more graceful and has more consistent frame times when running through an open world and coming upon areas where there's a difference in density or new objects are coming in that have to be initialized. In the demo, like I said earlier, it was flawless in terms of frame time. And I ran it through our tools, and that's what it showed. And you can see that by eye regarding that. But if you watch it technically a couple times while they're traversing through that large open world with the camera flying around, you can still see some like hitches in a way. And running through the footage manually, you can see that they aren't actually the game freezing for a second like you would expect from a normal frame time hitch. Rather, it's a camera hitch. And I found out in games, a lot of games like Clair Obscur, Jedi Survivor, Silent Hill on the consoles and on PC, that even if a frame time blip wouldn't occur, you could still see the animation in the moment when a frame time blip could occur. It would still break the animation. So animation would stop really quickly and then hyper accelerate the next frame to keep up with the time, the delta time. And that actually is still shown in this demo. And that actually may be a deeper seated issue within Unreal Engine. But at the moment, it at least didn't show off, the demo didn't show off like big streaming hiccups, like which usually if you try and run the camera at full tilt through that Matrix Awakens demo, even on a high-end PC, you're going to see big hitches. And this demo didn't show that off at well. So that's a good thing for the future, but that's one thing we're going to have to wait and see till the final game to see what it actually means for performance.
Yeah. I mean, in sort of conclusion here, when CD Projekt Red announced that they were going to be using Unreal Engine, we were kind of disappointed, upset in a way, because the Red engine has proven to be so adaptable and so impressive over the years.
Yeah, really.
But here we are with the first fruits of their labor on Unreal Engine, and you can't really say that they haven't done a fantastic job based on the systems that we're seeing here. And I guess, a lot of the inherent sort of improvements that are just delivered by Unreal Engine do seem to be proven out here, Nanite, for example. So, I'd say there's grounds for immense optimism based on what we've seen on here, and obviously the reaction online to the demo has been fantastic. But what's your final thoughts?
Well, my final thoughts are mirror much of your own, where usually we don't see a game to this level of polish. It is a demo of assets running in something that won't be in the final game. But usually showing it off, they don't show it off on a base system or something like that right away. And I think that speaks to the level of confidence that CDPR has in their technology team, as well as their, this trust they've made with Epic to bring in their contributions into the mainline engine, like we can see with that fast streaming geometry tool plugin. So that's all really great stuff that I'm excited to see. There's still a lot that we have to see, though. We have to see the game running in its real form, with the real content from the real game instead of this stuff, which is probably just assets. We still have to see what it looks like on PC in a fully kitted out form, as well as on low-end kit. One thing that they mentioned in the UE 5.6 blog is that they're coming up with performance profiles for both PC and console. Hopefully that means that we can see the 60 FPS experience, which looks pretty great, right? We can see that translated over to similarly spec'd PCs, instead of there being some sort of inequality there that you wouldn't expect. So there's all these kind of things that we still have yet to see. But just from my personal perspective, one thing that I'm a little bit, it's good for all the console people, obviously, that I'm a little bit about is that I really liked in the past that they would kind of push the tech out first and then try and scale it down, because it tended to lead to these PC versions that were impeccable in a lot of ways. And they pushed well beyond the spec of the consoles. Here, since they are targeting a 60 FPS presentation already on the base consoles, that means they're going to be limiting some of their vision as a result, because 60 FPS, 16.6 milliseconds, each frame on, Ryzen 5 3600 CPU is, kind of CPU is, you're going to have to make sacrifices there. And I kind of always liked in the past how they would push for like a higher fidelity first and scale it down later. But we'll have to end up, once again, we haven't seen PC yet. We don't know what that means. We don't know what it means for the full game. So, but that's just my little bit of hesitation there in terms of what it means for their ambition.
Yeah, it's easier to scale up than it is to scale down, I think would be my counter argument to that. But at the same time, you're quite right in that the vision for the game will be defined primarily by the lower bounds, so to speak. But if you think about it, by the time this game comes out, we could very well be entering or on the verge of entering a new console generation.
Yes.
So, there's going to have to be some sort of contention made for the hardware that's going to follow, right? And similarly, if you think about the scalability of Cyberpunk 2077, which, runs on a Switch 2 or an Xbox One and then goes all the way up to a path-traced experience on PC, I think that there's still obviously a way forward there to actually scale that to super, super high-end graphics. And again, with the progress that NVIDIA has made with rendering in the last few years, the speed of which we managed to get a path-traced Cyberpunk, which I found to be quite staggering. Who knows what we're going to be looking at, 2 or 3 years from now on that front. So I think there is grounds for optimism in terms of the scalability there. But I kind of get your point, simply because historically CD Projekt Red have led on PC, right? And defined a vision and then sort of went from there. But I still think you can't really take anything away from them in terms of the fact that, hey, they had they didn't need to demonstrate this on a base PlayStation 5. I think that's the bottom line. They didn't need to. All of the sort of flaws that we talked about earlier, which kind of validate that it's real time, they could have eliminated those just by using a 5090, I think is the bottom line, right?
Yes, they could have, easily.
So, the fact that it's had that impact still, and people are sort of asking us whether it is actually running on a base PlayStation 5. I think that's a testament to what they've achieved and what Epic continues to achieve in pushing out these new features for Unreal Engine 5. In terms of sort of stuff that I'm looking forward to on UE5, I think, the new Gears game, obviously, is likely to showcase some of these cutting edge features without having to wait however long it is for The Witcher 4 to come out. So, I think there's going to be a lot to look forward to there with Unreal Engine that isn't specifically about The Witcher 4. But that's what I think about it. I mean, fantastic stuff, and can't wait to find out more. But yeah, that's it. That's it for this mini direct. Like, subscribe, share on the off chance you enjoyed it. Ring bells for notifications, and do consider the DF supporter program. But thanks for this one, Alex. It's been a good chat.
Same to you.
Okay, see you soon. Thanks for watching.